Steven, wake up, buddy.
Niners Chiefs, let's go.
Wow, your hair looks really good for just waking up.
I just woke up.
Welcome into the Western and Southern South Beach PFF Super Bowl house. Is that enough words for you guys?
That's all of them.
We are going to be live from Miami this morning, Wednesday morning, Thursday morning. It's going to be a lot of fun. 8 a.m. every morning, and then also in the evening, perhaps with a non-water/coffee beverage, which should be a lot of fun. Today, very special guest. This guest was chosen for this evening's show to make Steve's hair feel appropriate.
Wow.
Because all of our
Rick Fox? Who could this be?
Yeah, so your job is to guess specifically who might make Steve feel more at home with the hair. Looking good, buddy.
Thanks.
You excited?
Fresh cut from Cincinnati. Yeah, I'm excited. I'm ready to go.
We'll see how the humidity does with your hair.
Yeah, not great.
All right, we're going to start with this. So that the Chiefs and the Niners have a decent history. In case you just woke up this morning for the first time in 20 years, the Chiefs and the 49ers traded a fairly notable quarterback in Joe Montana. And in '94, they played each other for the first time when Montana was a member of the Chiefs. And the Niners went on to win the Super Bowl that year, but in that game, Montana had the last laugh, and the Chiefs won that game. If you go to PFF right now and have a elite subscription, you can actually see the grades for that game. And my question is this: we watched the game. What was your biggest takeaway? I'll start with you, the historian.
I mean, the biggest takeaway is that quarterback play carries, right? And Montana was the highest graded player for the Chiefs that day. The Chiefs were able to get a ton of pressure on Steve Young, who played okay. But ultimately, the better quarterback who played the best won the game.
Yeah, I love it when the data matches the story that you want to tell anyway.
Yeah.
And the idea that Joe Montana comes back, the revenge game against the team that, got rid of him for Steve Young, comes back, executes the revenge, gets the win, is the highest graded quarterback in the game, and it tells you exactly what you wanted to see. Steve Young was not able to overcome Joe Montana, even though Young played pretty well himself.
Yeah, he had a couple bad interceptions in that game. Like you said, the superstars played out. I just love that right now it's the oldest game in our database right now. So with PFF Elite, Premium Stats, you could go find 1994.
How old were you when that game was played?
I was 12.
So did you watch it? You don't remember?
No, I was not. I was not an every week NFL watcher at the time.
It sort of shows the history of both franchises since, because in 1994, the Niners, much like the Chiefs, were probably the best offense in the NFL. They had one of the better head coaches in the league in George Seifert. They had Mike Shanahan, Kyle's dad, as the offensive coordinator, and they were rolling. Kansas City sort of again, the history of their franchise is to basically buy other teams' quarterbacks, and specifically the Niners and Alex Smith, Joe Montana, Steve DeBerg, all them. And it hasn't worked for Kansas City. Montana took them to the AFC title game in '93. They hadn't been back until they got their own quarterback in round 1 of 2017 in Patrick Mahomes. The Niners won the Super Bowl in '94, have been back once, have not won since. Again, got their own quarterback in Jimmy G. So we've sort of come all the way back to where these two teams are the elite teams in the NFL now.
Well, you mentioned that, and the way that these two teams scored, the way they opened up the game, I thought was really interesting. Play action was a huge part of it. Yeah. The Chiefs ran play action to perfection en route to their first touchdown drive. And then the other thing that I took away from this was we know that play under pressure is not something that you can count on repeating itself from week to week. But in a singular game, it matters quite a bit. And Joe Montana in this game might have been at the tail end of his career, but my God, that guy looked really spry. I mean, he was evading the rush, making plays, and Steve Young was not. He owned his own pressure rate to a large extent, holding onto the ball. Derek Thomas, as you mentioned, got to him quite a few times. So I thought it was really interesting that long ago, it's still relevant today.
Niners used a lot of 21, a lot of 12 personnel in that game. We only saw 15 snaps from third wide receivers. Very similar to what we see now, where they run a lot of heavier personnel. They weren't as fast and athletic back then. They were more methodical with the West Coast offense. But it was kind of a fun blast from the past. You sort of see that they reverted back to it a little bit with Kyle, his dad's offense in '94. Led him to head coaching job in Denver the following year.
I think some people forget the storyline here, too. Montana and Young were teammates for a couple of years, and it wasn't just like Steve Young waiting for Montana. Montana was benched a couple times for Steve Young. They were, Bill Walsh was seeing the future at one point.
Steve Young was vocally adamant about playing to the media.
Right.
And then, Montana gets hurt in the 1990 NFC title game, doesn't play a snap in '91, only plays in 92. Steve Young's the MVP of the league in 92, leads them to a 14-2 record. And in the NFC title game when they're losing to Dallas, they want Joe back in the game. They want Joe. Joe was a legend, right? And he had won 4 Super Bowls. Young hadn't even won one yet to this game. And then Joe bests him. He has to wait all the way to get that Super Bowl. And even at least a little tarnished at the end that he still couldn't beat Joe in this one effort against him.
Yeah, imagine social media back in the day figuring out Steve Young or Joe Montana. But I think, the 49ers were always looking forward, and they were trying to say, look, Joe, you've been great, but we're starting to see you decline a little bit. Let's get to the next guy, which reminds me of the Chiefs. I mean, the Chiefs are sitting here in 2017. They have Alex Smith, who is a reasonable quarterback. Andy Reid won a ton of games with Alex Smith, and then they trade up to go get Patrick Mahomes. And that's why they're here in Miami right now. They made a power move to go get Patrick Mahomes to go from good to great.
Actually, both franchises did the same thing, right? The 49ers were winning games with Alex Smith. Alex Smith was the league's leading passer in terms of passer rating, much like he was in 2017 with the Chiefs. And they went with Colin Kaepernick, and we've seen like the good end of that variance, right? And we've seen maybe the bad end of that variance, but good on both of these franchises for recognizing that to win the Super Bowl, you need plus variance play from the quarterback.
They also both moved on from Alex Smith after the best year that he had for that team.
Yeah.
Like, you get peak Alex Smith, you get the absolute maximum you can expect from him, and you know that it's still not good enough to take you where you want to go, so
what was crazy about that year is, so that Chiefs season, they opened up in New England. They're a pretty heavy underdog to the Patriots in New England. And they come out with Alex Smith and stun them, right? We can all remember Kareem Hunt just destroying Cassius Marsh en route to 70-plus yard touchdown. And they played really well to start the season. And then all of a sudden, like, peter off. But the Patriots in that game were actually, I have it on very good authority, preparing for Pat Mahomes to start.
Yeah.
Because they watched him in the preseason, and they had said, look, this guy is way better than Alex Smith.
Yeah.
There's no way that Andy Reid doesn't start this guy. And then, of course, Alex Smith has this great start to the season. If he doesn't have that great start to the season, I do wonder, do they go to Mahomes earlier? I mean, they lost to Mariota and the Titans, which is crazy to think about in that season in the playoffs.
Yeah, and not only that, they played Smith, but they played Smith in a sort of an offense evolving towards Mahomes. And in 2016, Alex Smith's average depth of target was bigger than only Sam Bradford in that year where the Vikings had no offensive line, and he set the completion record. But in 2017, he increased his ADOT by half a yard, right? Tyreek Hill was a down-the-field player in his first year as the #1 receiver for the league. Travis Kelce went from a guy who led all tight ends in yards after the catch for like 3 out of 4 years. He's become increasingly more of a down-the-field threat. This year, he led tight ends in catches over 20 yards downfield. And that offense, to Andy Reid's credit, evolved that way, not with the insertion of Mahomes, but with the drafting of Mahomes and the bridge year with Smith.
Yeah, and we kept talking on the podcast that we thought that they might unleash Mahomes late in the year, much like the 2012 Kaepernick move and all that stuff. But people forget Alex Smith was like the most efficient downfield passer that year. So like you said, it was his best season, 2017, but the Chiefs were like, no, we're not just going to be getting on the green, going to the playoffs every year. We want to try to win a championship, and it's starting to pay off.
So Mahomes comes in the next season. He sets the world on fire. We rewatched the Niners-Chiefs game where Jimmy G, it was scarring for me. Jimmy G tears his knee in that game.
And him too, frankly,
yes.
literally.
But Mahomes is off to this incredible start and has an incredible record-setting year. And they fall short in the playoffs. And my question is this: is Mahomes better this season? Are the Chiefs better this season? Or have they simply gotten lucky in that they've been able to play 2 AFC South teams and overcome double-digit deficits in doing so?
No, I don't think so. I mean, you look at the Chiefs season in 2018, and they were their defense was just holding on for dear life. You look at the Chargers game week 1, the Steelers game. They gave up a 21-point lead in the Steelers game week 2, and then in the Niners game, if Jimmy G stays healthy for the rest of that game, there's a better than puncher's chance that they come back and win that one. They surrendered a lead in the AFC title.
Beathard threw a touchdown that got nullified.
They surrendered a 14-point lead on Thursday Night Football to the Chargers late in the season. They gave up, a number of points to the Seahawks in a late season loss. They were crowned the best team in the AFC in September and were hanging on the rest of the time. This season, by contrast, now we slept on them because of the Mahomes injury on a high-profile game, high-profile loss to the Packers. But we forget the fact that they beat Baltimore in week 3. They've avenged every loss since. They beat the Patriots in, I believe, November or December. And these AFC South teams are no slouch. I mean, Tennessee was the hottest team in football when they came into Arrowhead. The Chiefs are just like peaking at the right time and were overshadowed for much of the year by the teams like Baltimore San Francisco, for example. And so I think they're better equipped.
I think there's a couple of things. On offense, I think they are so much more comfortable now at being this high-octane, easy-to-score offense, so that when you get down by double digits, it doesn't matter. They're happy being there. If anything, that is their comfort zone. And I think we thought that this offense wasn't as good as it was a year ago because Patrick Mahomes had the ankle injury, then the dislocated knee, then a hand injury, then a chest injury. Like, he's been dealing with everything right up until the playoffs. Suddenly you give him a week's rest, and MVP Patrick Mahomes is back.
Plus injuries to his support. I mean, they beat the Ravens in week 3 without Eric Fisher, without Tyreek Hill, a number of players banged up. They really haven't had. I mean, their running backs this season have basically been guys like you and me off the street, and they've been fine. But you're right. And one of the things for me when I
saw you running on the beach this morning, looking spry.
One of the things I think is important is you talk about comfort, right? And why are the Chiefs comfortable in their own skin on offense? Because they know their defense is not elite. Their defense is not as good as the 49ers. But they know that their defense can get a stop or two.
Yes.
And last season, that was just simply not the case. And both sides of the ball are complementary that way. Your offense can score, your defense can be more aggressive. When your defense has your back, you can be more aggressive on offense. And I think that makes them a better team.
That's the other change to me this year, is that the defense, it's not become good, but it's completely changed how it does things, right? Last year, we have a system, we play man coverage all the time, and if you can beat that, you're going to beat us, right? Or at least your offense will match ours. This year, it's much more game plan oriented. It's like, all right, we might still not be great, but we're at least going to come in with a game plan that causes you the most difficulties, and that in and of itself means we're going to steal a couple of drives here and there, and that is all you need for that offense to dominate against anybody.
What's so interesting about, you hit the nail on the head with the Mahomes thing. The totality of the season doesn't look as good, but right now, I don't think it's egregious to say that he's playing better. In fact, we look at his negatively graded play rate. You think about those that are uncatchable passes or bad sacks that a quarterback takes. In the playoff run, just 4% of his dropbacks are negatively graded. To give you a sense of how incredible that is, the league average is 15. The league leader this season was at 8. He's twice as good as the league leader over the past 2 games. He just doesn't make mistakes. And that level of consistency, they're not just a big play offense. They're the most consistent. They have the highest floor of any offense in the NFL. And then on top of that, the defense no longer has this floor that is through the ground, right? They're not going to get destroyed. And it's interesting how that came about, because last year was the pass rush, was very solid, but coverage could not handle really anything. And this year it's been a total kind of shift of that narrative.
Yeah, and with Mahomes, I mean, that was the difference earlier in the year. He was missing a lot more throws, and it was like, there's still guys wide open. This offense does actually have more to do. Now, his first 2 games, his patience, taking what's been there, that has been a lot.
But even with that, his negative graded throw rate was 15% in a time when he was banged up, his offense was banged. So to George's point, the floor is so much higher. On defense, to your point, we talked about all offseason. We got a lot of flack. We've discussed this a number of times with football people, math people. Rushing the passer, right? Rushing the passer is important, but it has to come as a part of a complementary defense where you can cover. And a season ago, the Chiefs led, they had a ton of sacks. They led our pass rushing grades. And when teams like the Patriots wanted to, they got access to their first reads and were able to move the football. And while, to Sam's point, they're not a good defense yet, they're 31st in our pass rush grades. Like Frank Clark, he's had a number of pressures in the playoffs, still hasn't graded well because a lot of them come late. And they come late because, they're able to make the quarterback go to a second read far more often than last season. And then, even then, when they go to their first read, they've been a top 6 to 7 defense in the NFL in terms of limiting expected points. So, kudos to Steve Spagnuolo, because it's just been a really good transition from a defense that was very stubborn with their personnel to a defense that is molded to, I would say, weak personnel, especially in the back 7.
Yeah, I think the pass rush versus coverage thing is interesting, right? It's this sort of symbiotic relationship between the two of them. And to me, pass rush is an awful lot like an offensive line on offense. It's not, in and of itself, it's not going to do anything, right? A great offensive line is not going to make everything happen, but it gives you the platform for all the other things to succeed. So if you have a really good pass rush, it helps high-end coverage players because they don't have to cover as long. They don't have to think about the third read down the line, and suddenly those guys can do the things that make a big impact. and have the value on defense.
But competent coverage gets you in the door.
Sure,
And that's the thing where the Chiefs have just simply not gotten in the door defensively since probably 2015, and now they're in there.
This is a great transition to the Niners' path to the Super Bowl, because in large part the narrative has been the defense made a huge improvement. Obviously the offense improved, but the defense went from last to first. And the narrative is that it's because of the pass rush. The pass rush got a lot better. And Nick Bosa has been fantastic. Eric Armstead has had a great career contract year. But what's interesting to me is that their coverage has become very solid. If you look at just quick throws, so throws in 2.5 seconds or less, their coverage grade last year was 31st. And that speaks to your point, right? Quick throws, you're just allowing guys to get open. There's nothing the pass rush can do in that point, right? Even if they have your speedy, ass off the edge, right? You can't get there in 2.5 seconds. This year, on those throws, they rank second in the NFL in coverage grade. I think that cannot be overlooked.
And I think it goes to what Sam's saying too. When you kind of trust that your pass rush is going to get home a little bit quicker, you could cheat up a little bit. Richard Sherman is back to normal. He's not really coming off. He's not coming off of an injury where he wasn't really the same in 2018. He's been our top-graded corner this year. Guys like Jimmy Ward flying around the field, closing in on that underneath stuff. So I think the Niners have done a good job kind of marrying the coverage and pass rush, knowing that there's a little bit of trust up front and that they can come up and tackle and prevent those big plays that killed them last year.
Well, and that shows what the strength of having a good overall team, right? When we talk about pass rush versus coverage, we're probably talking more about the 5 in the secondary, more so than just get an elite guy, right? It's sort of that group. And, Kella Witherspoon struggled a little bit, so they went with Emmanuel Mosley, an undrafted player in 2018, and he's been great. I mean, he's, covered extremely well. They've done well in the slot, and they've done well at safety. And when they've struggled defensively, it's been when there's been a chain link that's been gone, right? In the second half of the season, they gave up positive expected points added, and a lot of it's because Kwan Alexander's hurt. A lot of it, Jaquiski Tartt's hurt. Richard Sherman's banged up a little bit. They're playing better teams, so other teams are a little bit more comfortable throwing on them. They're not throwing from behind and things like that. We've seen in the playoffs, now their competition hasn't been great, but we've seen in the playoffs, everybody's healthy and that symbiotic trust is there, right? They know that their offense is good enough to back them up if they give up a big play. But even at the micro level of the defense, their coverage knows that they don't have to cover for very long, and their pass rush knows that if they don't get home on this one snap, their coverage isn't going to get decimated.
Trust seems to be from the top down. And you mentioned this earlier when we were talking. Lynch and Shanahan coming in, having each other, the trust of one another, the trust of the organization from ownership down, and that seems to have really permeated through both sides of the ball, right? There's trust on the defensive side, but on the offensive side, they have really come into form, right? They're not just a running attack; they're a unique, diverse offense, and I think that gets overlooked sometimes when you just look at the raw rushing totals. But This is really this is Lynch and Shanahan putting their stamp on this organization.
Yeah, and with Shanahan, we'll get into the weeds later in the week with some of this stuff, but Shanahan has a history, 12 years as a play caller. This year they have the number 4 most efficient passing offense using our expected points added number, and Jimmy G's our 12th graded quarterback just from a passing standpoint. So they're 4th most efficient. He's the 12th best quarterback. That is the story of Shanahan's career. He's making an efficient offense no matter who the quarterback is. And then when you get elite quarterback play like Matt Ryan in 2016, you have MVP caliber numbers. But he has a history of taking Matt Schaub, RG3, Matt Ryan, and now Jimmy G and elevating that pass game, and then creating a unique rushing game and jet sweep, end around, trick play. Everything is working together, and the Niners know how to win on the edges.
This didn't happen overnight. When Jimmy G came in and took the reins at the end of that season 3 years ago, his average depth of throw was 9.5, 10 yards downfield. In that Chiefs game that they played where he tore his ACL, that first half, he was about 10 yards average throw downfield. In the second half, they made a comeback. His average depth of throw went down 3 yards, about 6.5. That's where it is this year. That's kind of what they did with Nick Mullins. They said, look, we are going to get guys in space. We are going to throw to the middle of the field. They throw the middle of the field more than any other team. And that is really where that offense kind of set itself in place. That no one throws the ball shorter than the Niners, but also no team picks up more yards after the catch per reception than the Niners. And that's really the story here, getting guys in space and letting those athletes run.
Well, you look at their success rate on passes is basically the same as the Chiefs. It's the Chiefs are a little bit more explosive, but the Niners get you play after play after play. And I'm glad we're talking about the passing game because I think the narrative right now is that Jimmy G is he's riding in the car. He's not driving in the car in the this Super Bowl weekend.
People are way too caught up on the last thing that they saw. He threw 8. He's had a lot of good. He hasn't been great this year, but he's had a lot of good games where they've needed.
The Niners are a top half of the league in terms of efficiency running the football, play for play on success rate. They're an explosive offense. They're in the top 7 in terms of expected points added in the run game, but they are not living and dying off the run game, because if they were, they would not even have been in the playoffs. Jimmy G has played well enough. The passing game, to your point, is sort of more of a holistic thing. The passing game carried the Niners in games where they needed them, against the Rams, for example, against the Saints. They are not the 1 seed if they don't go on the road and put up 48 against the Saints, and a lot of that's Jimmy G, a lot of that's Kyle Shanahan. So the last thing we saw is the run game decimating the Minnesota Vikings and the Green Bay Packers. But make no mistake, this is a team that has gotten good because their quarterback play and the wide receivers have elevated, and obviously George Kittle, have elevated this offense to new heights.
They do some really clever stuff from a schematic X's and O's point of view, because, as you said, they love to target the middle of the field. That's where they want to be. Most offenses, they try and find the space on the perimeter, on the edge, outside the numbers, because that's where you can get those athletes in space. The 49ers want to do it in the middle, but the middle's crowded. It's got bodies, there's linebackers, there's safeties everywhere. So they run all this ton of pre-snap motion. They run a whole bunch of things that is designed around moving bodies out of there to create the space that you can then attack. And seeing them do that is something very few teams are doing at a high level.
Well, and that's a weakness the Chiefs have, right? I mean, at linebacker, they're still kind of below replacement level in some places, and so it'll be interesting to see. Spagnuolo's done a good job, I think, of moving safeties into that position in the second half of the season. But Shanahan's going to have some wrinkles for them this week.
Jimmy G, since Emmanuel Sanders came over, 8th highest graded quarterback. He has not been a slouch. I think that is something we'll talk about as we go on this week. Speaking of this week, we've got some fun stuff planned. We're going to head to Radio Row right now. We'll be back this evening, 6 p.m. for a little happy hour. We'll trade in our coffee for some better drinks, I guess. And so you'll want to stay tuned. Check in on our main account. You guys will be tweeting stuff out as well. Let's go have some fun. See you guys.
Happy Super Bowl week.